What is up, everybody? Welcome to DFS, Drive for Show, DFS for Dough here on RotoGrinders. Talking golf another week. I messed up the name of the show there at the beginning. 1 week off, and I just throw it. It all goes out of whack. Got to get back in the swing of things here, but we are here for another week of golf talk here on RotoGrinders. I am back from vacation. Justin Van Zuiden, STL Cardinals 84 here with you. Sorry that I had to miss last week with my hometown type event at the John Deere Classic. Only about a half an hour away from me. Wasn't able to get there this year. Was a little disappointed not to make it, but had a nice vacation anyways. And back in the mix here this week for the Genesis Scottish Open. We got Dylan Wilkerson alongside again this week as well. Dylan, how you been?
I've been doing well, Justin. Glad to be back. You talking about getting back into the swing of things. Apparently, things didn't go so bad for the U.S. Open that you guys asked me to come back and preview the Scottish Open. So very excited. It's a fun event. We get some names we don't normally see if you just follow the PGA Tour. It should be a very good time. I'm very excited.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting tournament to break down because it's a co-sanctioned event between the DP World Tour, aka the European Tour, which I will probably say throughout the show just as a matter of convenience, but the Euro Tour and the PGA Tour with a co-branded event here. That is, I believe this is the fourth year that they've done the co-branding. So a lot of players that we don't normally see on the PGA Tour. I think it's an interesting week to potentially get an advantage if you look at some of those guys. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a bit. Of course, coming off a week at the John Deere Classic where it was just an absolutely wild leaderboard. I think when I looked on Saturday, there were maybe 18 players within a couple shots of the lead at one point. There were 5 or 6 different players that held the lead at various points on Sunday, and it was Brian Campbell that ends up coming away with the victory in a playoff. So nice to see him get that. He's a University of Illinois graduate, so it was nice to see him win in Illinois, beating Emiliano Grillo. They were both at minus 18 for the week. David Lipsky and Noto's favorite, Kevin Roy, finishing just one shot back. There were 5 players that were just 2 shots back, so it was really a crowded mix there on Sunday, playing through some raindrops as well. But Campbell ends up walking away with the victory. It wasn't the best week DFS-wise for me. Kind of glad that I was on vacation and went a little bit lighter, but would have had far too many landmines if I would have gone super heavy. I like JT Poston as a pivot away from Ben Griffin. They both ended up missing the cut last week. Yeager was a withdraw. Andrew Putnam, who I wrote up in the article, was a withdraw midway through his couple of rounds. So it's the John Deere is always a tournament where there's a lot of variance. It's kind of a birdie fest. It's a weak field. It's often a bit unpredictable, but I like it just because I usually attend for a day or two. But it was a weird tournament this year. So glad I didn't go super heavy. Don't think we need to spend too much time hammering down talking points from last week because most of those guys aren't in the field this week. But any takeaways, thoughts from last week's event from your end?
Yeah, a very fun event. I don't blame you about, not keeping too close of an eye on vacation. For me, vacation's more playing golf than watching golf. But I did get to catch some of that final round on Sunday. Brian Campbell, I believe the third first-time winner in 2025 to win multiple times this year. Ben Griffin and Ryan Fox being the other two. A lot of young names at the top of this leaderboard. A lot of old names at the top of this leaderboard. You have a pretty good mix of everyone. Max Homa got his stuff together a little bit. Nick Dunlap, great to see some good golf.
That was awesome.
Yeah. He was really struggling there for a very good time. So hopefully he gets the ground back under him. But yeah, very good week. My guy, Rico Hui, pretty good week. So all things said and considered, Birdie Fest, like you said, good event, and ready to get onto some link style golf now. 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah. Dunlap was on a stretch of horrible miscuts in a row. So I was kind of keeping an eye on him a little bit on Friday. He was, decently above the cut line and had like 3 bogeys in a row on the back. And I was like, oh no, he's really feeling it with how much he struggled. And then he ended up getting through the cut and played really well on the weekend to finish T11 when all was said and done. So good week for him. He's really been struggling with the driver, has kind of been the big story with him. And he did continue to lose strokes off the tee, but made up for it with the putter. So he was in the mix there, T11. You mentioned some of the veterans. Matt Kuchar snuck inside the top 5 there as well. Lucas Glover, a couple of the veterans that also finished well last week. But we'll go ahead and close the book on that one and move forward to the Scottish Open. So again, I mentioned this in the intro, a co-branded event with the DP World Tour and the PGA Tour that they started about 4 years ago, the week before um, the uh, the Open Championship. And it used to be, the John Deere always used to be the week before the Open, and the Euro Tour would have the Scottish Open as well. And then they ended up adjusting the schedule just slightly to where they could have this co-branded event the week before, which I think has worked out well. You see a lot of guys go over and play this tournament the week before the Open. And so we have, one of the strongest fields you'll see in a non-major for the year because of the way they've done this now 4 years running. So your thoughts just on this event, generally the course, any initial thoughts before we dive in?
Yeah, very fun event. Like we kind of talked about. You have some big names, you have some not so big names. If you don't follow the DP World Tour, you're going to see guys that you likely have never heard of or have not heard of a lot. What I find interesting is that the Renaissance Club. I've heard it Renaissance. I've heard the Renaissance. So however it's correctly pronounced.
It's going to be Renaissance for me because I'm American.
I like the sound of that, Justin. I like Renaissance. When I read it, that's what it sounds like in my head. So
I can't do any sort of French accent, so it's going to be Renaissance for me.
Renaissance, oui. Yeah, it's hosted this event since 2019, as you said, co-commissioned in 2022, I believe, was when Xander won it. Last year, we had top 20 finishers, and I'm going to mess some of these names up. Romain Langasque, Richard Mansell, Connor Syme, Alejandro Del Rey, like guys we don't know, or at least I have hardly heard of. So it's exciting to get this kind of tournament where maybe some lesser names, it's going to be tough to win, but we might see some of those more unknown names towards the top of the leaderboard. Newer course, built in 2008, so it's not the terrain isn't really beaten to death like some of these older link style courses over there, weathered down to death since it was, I believe, April of 2008 it opened up. But it's going to be a great course, great tournament, and excited to see what we got coming up.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun, and I think a potential week to have an advantage for those of you that really grind the player pool because, casual players are going to stick largely to the names that they're familiar with, the guys that they've seen, they know. And so a lot of these European regulars that don't play on U.S. soil a whole lot, you're not going to see a whole lot of ownership on there. On really any of those guys, even if we prop them up within our little bubble here, it's not going to be enough to move the needle for massive ownership on some of these guys. So interesting angle to take. The course is a par 70, but it's a little bit unique with the layout. There are 5 par 3s and 3 par 5s, so only 10 par 4s on the scorecard this week. So if you want to bump up par 3 scoring with an extra par 3 on the docket, I certainly think you can do that. If you're not familiar with how link style golf tends to go in Scotland, this isn't a true traditional like all link style course, but most of the links courses have basically no trees. So the defense is bunkers and rough and wind primarily. The first time this event was a co-branded event, I believe the winning score was 7 under. Then it got to 15 under the second year and 18 under last year. Probably will be closer to that 18 number again this year because right now the weather forecast is calling for like less than 10 mile an hour winds every day, which is like nothing in Scotland. So could be all systems go for quite a few birdies again this week. So anything else generally? Otherwise, we'll start going through it.
No, I'm just very excited. I think when we get into the players, it's going to be interesting to see who you favor versus kind of the course fit that I'm going for. This link style golf, when it hits the fairway, you don't have a whole lot of saying where that ball goes. So it's going to be fun. Very excited to get into it, Justin.
Yeah, it's a unique type of course where you can get some rollout into weird areas and stuff like that, and Some golfers just don't like it because they don't have as much control over, where the ball is landing and stopping. But the creative ones, tend to like the links golf a little bit more. All right, let's go ahead and dig into it here. We've got a slightly different pricing structure on DraftKings this week because most of the bigger names are playing, where you've got a clear split again with Scheffler at the top. He's 13.1K, Rory at 11.4, and Schauffele at 10.1 are your top three golfers. And then maybe we can throw Fleetwood in there as well at 9,900, coming off that heartbreaking loss at the Travelers about 3 weeks ago. We know Rory hasn't been in as good a form since the Masters. Obviously, a little bit of a dip to be expected after winning the green jacket. Scheffler continues to play great golf. Xander not having his best season. Fleetwood playing pretty well, other than just can't get over the finish line when he's playing in the States. But otherwise, you take that out of the mix, he's having a pretty good year. So right now we've got ownership at around 25% on both Scotty and Rory, about 16% on Schauffele, about 15% on Fleetwood. So how are you handling kind of the top four at the top of the board here?
I gotta address the Tommy Fleetwood stuff that you brought up. Just absolutely brutal. He's a pretty even keeled personality on tour, so I feel like people are pretty neutral towards him. But man, just that never being able to get over that hump and seeing him lose in that fashion at the Travelers was heartbreaking. But yeah,
he even admitted it too. He said, it sucks right now or whatever. I can't remember his exact quote, but he basically, went on TV and said, yeah, this stinks, which, yeah. I mean, everybody feels that way. Obviously, you just don't know whether a guy's going to try to cover it up or not, but he was honest.
For sure. And you have to appreciate that. Yeah. But we have another week here where are we going to pay the premium on Scotty Scheffler? He's taken 2 weeks off. The other times that I've noticed he's done that in his career have always been before the API, the Arnold Palmer Invite. I think it was this year he finished T11, and then he won last year after taking 2 weeks off before that event. So I'm going to have some Scotty Scheffler. The question is, how does that limit the rest of your lineup having to pay that premium on him? There are, we look at Rory, we look at Xander. I like how Rory has seemingly distanced himself from the comments he made after the Masters, where he was like, you win this Masters, you do this big thing, and then it's like, what's next? And we saw some poor golf from him after that. But this does feel like the opportunity to reset a little bit. You get to Scotland, you play this event, you get ready for the Open. He's played well here before. I believe it was he won in 23. I think I tied for fourth last year. And then he had two top 20s. Tied for 19th at the U.S. Open, tied for 6th at the Travelers. It does seem like a corner has turned there a little bit, and I'm not as skeptical about Rory's performance ahead of this tournament as I was the U.S. Open the last time I was on. And then go ahead, Justin.
No, I was just with Rory, that U.S. Open finish, that he had the best round of the day on Sunday. So when you take that final round of the U.S. Open plus then the T6 at the Travelers, his last 5 rounds have been pretty good. So, I'm kind of with you. I think turning that corner and, taking a couple weeks off and now going overseas probably has his mind, more back to normal. And, I think this is a good spot for him too. I mean, with the first and the fourth, and everybody makes a big deal out of his high ball flight on links courses, but with the winds projected to be down this week, it's really tough to get Scheffler in there because the 6K values aren't that spectacular. So, I find myself starting with Rory a lot.
I've tried to get some Scotties in there, but you're exactly right. The problem is you get down to the 6Ks and it's like, what are we going to do here? But we'll get to that later. The other guy here, Xander, he won in 2022, coming off of a tied 61 at the Travelers. The thing with Xander here is he's amazing in his approach from 150 plus out. And that is a shot that I think a lot of players are going to find themselves hitting. I believe it's 150 to 225 is the most common approach shot in terms of groupings here. And Xander plays that very well. So I could see any type of rationalization for playing Xander on top of that. Really, those top 3 guys, Scheffler's going to be tough to fit in, but I can completely understand if you're going to play him. And really the same with Rory and Xander. So it's interesting at the top because they all seem like viable options in my opinion.
Yeah, they are. I'm probably going to be underweight on Scheffler just because I don't love the values. That does make me nervous. I'll be overweight on Rory, obviously for the reasons I just mentioned. I don't have a strong take on Xander, but given the lack of top finishes, I mean, he's only got one top 10 this year. I just got to prioritize the other guys over him. So I'll go with Rory 1, and then Fleetwood in terms of my exposure, then Scheffler, then Xander. But obviously, you're not doing anything wrong by playing any of them. That's just my personal take on that top 4. Anything else on those guys for you?
No, I would say that top 3. I'm not taking as much Fleetwood, but Xander, Rory, and Scheffler are all going to be involved there. So really hard to go wrong.
Absolutely. All right, let's go ahead and move down into the next range then, that 9K range. I know a lot of people do kind of like the balanced builds this week. If you don't like those values at the bottom, maybe you're starting with somebody in the 9s. Maybe you're playing 2 guys in the 9s. Maybe you're going with 1 guy in the 9s in your Rory or Scheffler build. We've got Morikawa at 9,600, Ludwig at 9,400, Hovland at 9,300, Justin Thomas at 9,200. Interesting angle with him. He's been very up and down of late, but he's got some experience on these types of courses. Robert McIntyre won here last year in his home country. Big story there. And then Sam Burns at 9K even. What do you think about this range?
Yeah, this 9K range is interesting because we have obviously all the big names. You mentioned McIntyre, who I think is going to be played a decent amount given that he won last year. We'll start with Morikawa here. This is a guy that I personally am going to have a good amount of. His putting has been in contention for the better part of the year, but he has putted well at Renaissance in the 2 appearances that he's played, posting more than a stroke gained in each of those appearances. Also, underrated part of this, he's going to have Billy Foster on the back. That's, I believe, Matt Fitzpatrick's old caddy. And I think that Billy is going to be a great resource for Morikawa to use when playing this kind of golf outside of the States, especially being with Matt Fitzpatrick previously. Some guys I'm kind of staying away from. Victor Hovland is kind of a tough one because I think he fits well for the course. You assume a little bit of risk with, I believe it was a neck injury that he withdrew from the Travelers with.
He's in the middle of the final round too.
Exactly. And I think he's came out and said he's been playing with his buddies, neck feels fine. I don't know many guys that withdraw from a tournament and then when asked about it, he's going to say, oh, it's still lingering, it's still hurting, it's still bothering me, especially leading up to a major championship the next coming week. So that's a guy, normally if he was healthy, I probably would be playing a little bit more of because the distance, I like the distance off the tee, but it depends if you're willing to assume that risk that he may not be 100% healthy. And you brought up Thomas. That's another guy that's tough because he's very good around the green. I just anticipate less than traditional around the green play for this tournament. A lot less wedges. I think it's going to be a lot of putting up to greens if players miss it, and they're able to, obviously. And Thomas has been great around the green, but it's with that wedge in his hand. So I'm staying away from Justin Thomas this week as well. I think tied 62 and tied 60 in his last 2 trips here. So not a lot of Thomas for me this week.
Yeah, I am probably out on him at that salary as well, though I think and I think I put him in my GPP article as an additional, elite kind of GPP upside option. And I think that's valid. I'm probably not going to have a ton in my pool just because of the salary and the way my lineup builds work. But I still think that the logic behind him does make sense if you are interested. It's ultimate kind of risk reward. I'll keep an eye on our projected ownership before I make a final call there. Right now, we've got him at about 14%. We've got Burns at about 17, McIntyre at about 12. I'm probably out on Hovland, but that's largely because I played him a good bit the week that he withdrew in the final round while he was inside the top 20. So that was a little personal burn on that week. And so I probably don't want to risk it. And I don't trust the chipping with a course like this one. So I'm probably underweight generally on the 9Ks. I don't like them as much as most people do. But again, I'm starting a lot of my builds with Rory and with Fleetwood. So, I can skip over this range a good bit. I do think the 8K range is a little bit more interesting. We've got Corey Connors in that, leading off that group at 8.9K. Matt Fitzpatrick, who's been playing better golf of late. I know Noto likes him this week. He's at 8,800. Seb Straka, Adam Scott, Ryan Fox, Harry Hall, Aaron Rye, Wyndham Clark, JJ Spawn, and Harris English, and Mav McNeely are your 8K golfers this week. If you follow me for any length of time, you know I've always targeted Ryan Fox in these types of events. Especially if the wind is down, he can bomb it. And he's always been a guy that I've targeted in Europe when it's been on a DFS slate. And now you also have to throw in the fact that he's actually been playing pretty good golf on the PGA Tour as well. 2 wins this spring, T19 at the US Open, T17 at the Travelers. So he's been much more consistent, hasn't missed a cut since the first week of April. And then, he's always been an option in these types of events, even when he wasn't in that good of form overall. So 8,500 Ryan Fox is the top play for me in this 8K tier. I don't mind Aaron Rye as well if you are banking on the irons this week. But what are your thoughts on the 8K range?
Yeah, definitely a very interesting range. I do like Matt Fitzpatrick. I think you said Noto is heavy on him this week. Actually, 13th in total strokes gained on links or hybrids link style courses. Plays very well at these style of courses, and he has positive total strokes gain this season going back to the Masters. So he's played pretty good golf since that period. Another guy that I like, Spawn, winning the U.S. Open the next week at the Travelers. Came in, didn't play super well Thursday, Friday, very well within his rights, just mail it in and say, you know what, hey, this isn't my week. Goes and shoots 66, 63 on the weekend. And it's that kind of mental fortitude and sticking with it when he really had no obligation to. He could have very well just gave up that weekend at the Travelers. And obviously he's played great golf this season. Maverick McNeely, another guy, seems to have broken out a bit of a slump that he was in the middle of the spring. Positive strokes gained putting in his last 3 events, and that's really where Maverick's bread and butter has been for the length of his career. And the driving distance is there. That's something that I think is going to matter this week. We see an abnormally low percentage of fairways hit at this course. I believe it's been under 60% since it's been sanctioned by the PGA Tour and as well as the DP Tour. And I think one year, might have been 22, it was like under 50%. And that's just because you can be as accurate as you want. It's just some of these fairways, once it lands, who knows where the ball's going. So I like the distance that we can see from McNeely. And then an interesting option here, I think at 86K or 8,600, Adam Scott finished second last season. He's been great in his last 6 events. Older guy, doesn't really have much of the distance, but plays great at links courses. I think he's a very viable option at this middle of the 8K range, and I'll definitely have some Adam Scott in my portfolio for this week.
Yeah, I like that call. I'll probably play a bit of him as well. A little easy to get overlooked, because people will think, well, that salary seems a little bit too high, but you mentioned a pretty good track record on links. He's a patient player. And even though he hasn't popped for like the top finishes, again, his last missed cut was the Masters. He did have a T12 at the US Open, T19 at the PGA, so he's playing good in the majors and just keeps it pretty steady. So I don't mind him. He feels a little overpriced in that for his upside at this stage of his career. But on this type of course, and if everybody else starts to take that frame of reference, I think that's an interesting one. So lots of different options in here. I think those balanced builds or you can take these as your second golfer if you're starting with Scotty, something like that. I mean, Harry Hall, I didn't even mention, and I've been on him all spring. And I think if I sorted my overall mixed condition model this week, Hall came out 4th overall. So I bump him down a little bit with the links layout, but certainly a guy that's playable as well. So strong 8K range, middle tier here, again, with this being a deeper field than we've seen for the better part of a month now. Anybody else you want to mention in here?
Not necessarily in that 8K range. It definitely looks like the 7K range, though. I mean, we just have a whole mess of players to choose from here.
Yeah, and if you start with Scheffler, you're left with about $7,400 per player. So you're going to be mixing and matching a lot of guys in this 7K tier. There are not a lot of options in the 6K, so we'll split the 7Ks in half. We'll talk about the top end of the 7K range first. So that gives us Taylor Pendrith, Rasmus Højgaard, Max Grazerman, Thomas Dietrich, Sungjae Im, Siwoo Kim, Tom Kim, 3 in a row, give you a tongue twister there. Neergaard Peterson, Nick Taylor, and Alex Noren. Let's see. I think we got one other at 75. Benyon and Nikolai Højgaard and Brian Harman also at that $7,500 mark. So as usual, the pricing gets pretty condensed with lots of players in the sevens. And yeah, there's lots of names in here. A couple of your favorites.
Yeah, it starts to get interesting at this price point because, like you said, it kind of gets all jumbled up in this 7K and even 6K range. I think at this point, it's really, I'm looking at players that drive the ball off the tee very far, even if it is at the sacrifice of a little bit of accuracy. I think the driving distance this week is going to be very important. And with that mindset, I look at guys like Rasmus Højgaard, who just absolutely destroy the ball. Peter, honestly, really either of the Højgaard brothers, Nikolai as well. A couple of good options here. Detry is one. Grazerman's a guy that he's a very well-rounded golfer. The one issue he has is that driving accuracy. And again, that's something this week that I'm not really holding to the detriment of any of these players. If you're a little less than the field in driving accuracy, I'm not going to hold that against you as much as I would in other weeks if you have that driving distance component, which Grazerman does. So for this top half of the 7K range, I think the Højgaards both are great options. Grazerman's a great option. I don't really hate Pendrith, but shorter guys, Siwoo Kim, Sungjae Im, I'm likely staying away from in this range.
Yeah, I think we're kind of in agreement on this range. Grazerman, I think, is really interesting. Not your typical like link style guy, but he's been so steady all year. Finished runner-up there at the Rocket Classic a couple weeks ago. 3 other top 25s in succession back in May and June. So I'm on him this week. Neergaard Peterson is my kind of Euro guy that I'm targeting in this range. Kind of a budding star, long off the tee. He's got 5 top 10s on the Euro Tour soil this year. He's got 1 top 10 in the States. He was T12 at the US Open, T14 on the DP World Tour last week. So Neergaard Peterson is kind of my flag plant Euro Tour guy this week, along with another guy in the lower part of the 7Ks. So that's how my number 1 guy is probably Neergaard Peterson in this range. Grazerman's probably my number 2. Don't mind the Højgaards as well. And then I would probably put Alex Noren after that. So going with some more of those Euro Tour experience guys that you can get on the cheap that aren't going to have high ownership this week. I've seen a few people talking about Brian Harman as well. I do not have a strong take on Harman this week. Right now, we've got him at about 5% ownership. So I prefer the kind of Euro regulars in this range, but otherwise don't mind sprinkling in some of those guys in there. So, all right, let's go ahead and move to the bottom part of the 7K range now. Even more names in here. I won't name them all just for listing them, but I'll throw it back to you here for a couple of your lower 7K options.
Yeah, a couple of really viable options here, in my opinion. I'm going to start with Jordan Smith, although the distance is about average. He has 3 top 7s going back to the beginning of May. He's played pretty good golf. 32 years old. Has a decent history here. In 2022, he finished tied for 24th. In 2023, he finished tied for 12th. He did miss the cut last year, but he has experience at this course, and that's a very viable option at 7,300. I think Marco Penjay, I'm probably saying that wrong. This is an interesting case. He hits the ball very long off the tee. He was actually suspended, I think either last year or 2 years ago, for gambling on golf. I don't think he was betting on himself or against himself. I think he was betting on another tour, but got a win this year in April on the DP World Tour. He finished tied 28th with the PGA Championship and coming off of 3 straight top 25s. I think Marco Penjay is a very viable option at the lower part of that 7K range as well, 7K on the dot. And then my guy, I understand I've only been on this show twice, and people are probably going to say, Dylan, of course this is your guy. He just won a couple weeks ago. Potgieter, I'm all over him if we can figure out why he WD'd last week. He WD'd, I think, in round 4, and no one really gave a reason why. It might be a Victor Hovland situation, tweak something in your neck. You got a big stretch coming up. Maybe take it easy. But guy just crushes the ball. Young guy, shaped like me, body build wise. So I'm always gonna side with the chubbier guy. But Potgieter is a very viable option as well. So this lower 7K range, again, I think you're just going with guys that can really crush the ball. Goddard, another great option at 7,100. Even Kevin Yu. So there's plenty of options here. If you do want to go with the Scotty Scheffler build, I think you can make it work with some of these guys in this range.
Yeah, I tried looking. I do not know why Potgieter withdrew. So it wasn't in the middle of the final round, at least, as was the case with Hovland. It was between the rounds, between the third round and the fourth round. I can't remember whether it was Saturday evening or Sunday morning that it was announced, but who knows what came up, and he did not disclose anything. So it's a bit of a guessing game there, but given that he's in the field this week and he went over there. The John Deere actually has a charter flight that they take the guys that are willing to play in the John Deere because they're trying to get everybody they can. The field's so bad. They do offer a charter flight for the guys that are going over to Scotland after. And he did go over there. He's still in the field. So presuming that whatever it was, maybe a small, kink in the neck, or like you mentioned, just something minor, and he didn't want to chance it with that final round. But a little bit of risk there for sure. If you are playing some of those bigger hitters, Goddard, Potgieter, the 3 you mentioned, we actually like the exact same guys in this range. Jordan Smith is my favorite. Mentioned that Niergaard Peterson was one of my favorites. Jordan Smith, has been a consistent force on the DP World Tour for years. Never plays in the States. Nobody really ever plays him in these type of events, but he's just a consistent top finisher. Just a guy that goes out and gets it done and isn't going to be owned. And 7,300 is kind of a bargain price, in my opinion, for his level of talent and where he consistently finishes on these types of courses. So I like the same guys in this range. Haotong Li, maybe another guy in that mold that didn't really make it full-time on the PGA Tour. You may remember him if you've been playing DFS golf for any length of time. That he was on the PGA Tour for a while. Didn't really make much of it, but has been playing full-time on the DP World Tour and hasn't missed a cut all season. Has 5 top 10s himself. So Haotong Li is another guy, maybe if you're looking for the Euro Tour regulars in that 7K range. So anybody else above 7,000 here that worth a shout out?
Not really interesting to me, but I have a question for you, Justin. You mentioned earlier that you were interested in Aaron Rai, I believe up in the 9K range. Is there any thought to Bezuidenhout, who has a similar skill set, hasn't been playing as good at golf, but getting him at a bigger discount than you'd get Rai? Have you put any thought to that?
Yeah, I don't mind him. Like you say, the form's been a little bit more hit or miss, but you're getting so Rai is 8,300 and Seabez is 7K. So you're getting a pretty good discount in there. He'll probably end up in my multi-entry pool. I wouldn't put him probably in a 3 max or anything, but if you're building, 40, 50, 60 lineups, I think you put him in some for sure.
Beautiful.
All right. I mentioned there isn't a whole lot in the punt range this week, and it's being generous. If I sort by under 7,000 right now, so Bud Cauley at 7,000, we've got at 8% ownership. Under 7,000, I don't think we have anybody above 5%. I could be wrong. If we do have anybody above 5%, it's close. The best projections, point per dollar wise, for under 7K are, we've got Valimaki is popping in there, Andrew Putnam, but he was a WD in the middle of last week. Matty Schmid, Tom Hoagie, but these are guys that don't have a ton of experience on links. Eric Van Rooyen, Laporta is a name that I've seen thrown out there a little bit. Francesco Laporta would be one of your Euro names in that range, but I just don't like a lot there's so many options in that lower to mid 7K range that, and this is also why I'm not getting to as much Scheffler. Like, I just don't find somebody I could jam in here and feel comfortable about it. Valimaki is the one name that I have in my player pool right now, but he's missed the cut in 3 of his last 4 starts. So, is there anybody you feel better about than me down here?
I've got 2. They're a bit of a stretch. I had Grant Forrest. He hits the ball farther than tour average, which is something I look for. And he's played well at this course. He has had positive strokes gain total in his last 2 appearances at Renaissance. Again, cheap option. I won't have a lot of him, but if you're trying to build a Scheffler lineup, I think you could fit him in there. And then Laurie Cantor, he's been great off the tee this year. Made the cut at the U.S. Open after missing 5 straight cuts before that, and then followed that up with T7 on the DP World Tour. So I think those 2 guys are viable options, but kind of like you said, it gets thin pretty quick down in that 6K range. But I would go Cantor and Forrest for me down there.
Forrest has made the cut each of the last 2 years here with 2 top 40s. He's one of the few guys in this range that has back-to-back made cuts. Langesk is the other one who you mentioned at the top of the show with a 3rd and a T25 here the last 2 years. So if you're just looking at course history, Langesk kind of pops there at 6,700, but his form on the DP World Tour has been pretty rough. 3 straight miscuts. He did have a T9 before that, but he'd be another name that maybe you could throw into some GPP builds, but boy, it gets pretty rough down here for value. So I am probably not digging in here too deep, and that's the benefit of starting with Rory instead of Scheffler, or even if you're using Scheffler, you've got, again, about 7,400 on average per player. So you don't necessarily need to go down super far into the 6s if you just live in that 7K range. So there's probably going to be somebody down here that plays well. Just tough to try to peg who that might be. So anybody else for you before we call it a show for this week?
Nothing else for me. No other players. I pretty much touched on them all. It's going to be a fun week. I do think we see some no name, no one's really ever heard of, get a top 20. It just kind of seems to be what happens at this course when you merge the 2 tours. But very excited. It's going to be fun, and it's going to be a great lead up to the last major of the year, some more major championship golf.
Absolutely. Open Championship will be here next week. So if you want to get some practice on adjusting your sleep schedule, another reminder, this tournament locks at 2 a.m. Eastern time, Thursday morning, 2 a.m. Eastern time. And that is, if I do my time zones correctly, like 11 p.m. Pacific time on Wednesday night. So make sure you don't get stuck with that dummy lineup that you put in thinking you can adjust it Thursday morning. These tournaments are, played starting in the middle of the night if you're in the States. So if you want to get some practice on, going to bed super late or getting up super early, the Open Championship is the 1 year. And I won a GPP at the Open Championship Saturday and Sunday. I was up at like 3 a.m. sweating golfers, and I didn't sleep well for like 4 days after that, trying to get back on a normal routine. So if you want some practice, you can do that with this week. Whether it's in my younger days, it would have been staying up late. Now there's no chance of that, and it's getting up early because I'm old now. But, you can take either path if you want to.
That's what I was going to say. It's just a throwback to the high school days. Pulling an all-nighter, watching some golf at 2 a.m. Should be fun.
Our oldest is going to be a sophomore in high school, and he's a runner. And so for one of their summer events, they did a all-night camp out at the coach's house. They had a bonfire and stuff, but the shtick of the thing was they had to run a mile every hour from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m.
Wow.
So on the hour, every hour they had to do a mile. So that's 12 miles. My son did the first 10, and then he skipped the last 2, but he got home and I'm like, okay, now it's 7 a.m. and you're home. Are you going to go to sleep? He goes, no, I'm fine right now. I'm fine. And he goes, I'm just going to take a shower. And so he took a shower, and I was like, boy, he's been in the bathroom for a while. And I kind of peeked in there. After he got out of the shower, he had fallen asleep naked on the bathroom floor with a towel around him, passed out on the floor. So He's 15, so he'll be in those high school, late night stages here before too long. But that's 10 o'clock for me, and I'm it gets pretty tough. So I'll wake up early and go to bed early and wake up early if I've got a sweat. But in any case, a long way of saying just make sure you got your lineups in before lock. I also want to thank TJ for producing behind the scenes for us every week while Steve has been out. Steve will be back, I believe, next week. So thanks to TJ for helping out, as always, with the production side. Thanks to Dylan for stepping up and joining me this week. And I am Justin. Hit that like button on the YouTube. Appreciate that very much. And until then, we'll be back next week for the Open Championship. For TJ, for Dylan, I'm Justin. We'll see you, everybody.